You never really forget the moment your whole world collapses. Mine, it came wrapped in the smell of turkey and sweet potatoes on a chilly Thanksgiving afternoon. My name is Eleanor Grace Whitmore. I'm 66 years old now, but there's a part of me still frozen in the autumn of 1981. I was just 18 when I married Mark. He was 21, charming, reliable, and the only boy I ever kissed. We lived in Waverly, a tiny town buried in the heart of Kentucky, where neighbors still wave from their porches, and everyone knows your birthday and your business. We built a life in a white 2-story house with green shutters, right down the road from his brother's farm. Sunday potlucks, Friday night football, warm pie on the windowsill. It all felt so American, so wholesome, so secure. Until the very people I trusted most, Mark, my husband, and Helen, his brother's wife, betrayed me under that same roof. I wasn't just cheated on, I was replaced, in my own family, by my sister-in-law. I found out in the cruelest way imaginable. She got pregnant, and the baby wasn't her husband's. It was mine and Mark's. Do you know what it's like to sit across the dinner table from your husband and the woman he slept with, pretending you don't know they've been destroying you behind your back? Have you ever smiled at a child, knowing they were born out of your deepest wound? I carried that silence for decades. But now, I need to tell the truth. Not just for me, but for every woman who's ever been betrayed and told to keep it in the family. So come sit with me for a while. Because what happened next? Well, let's just say, no one at that Thanksgiving table left unchanged. Before we dive into this true story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Tap the notification bell so you never miss a new story. And leave a comment. I read every single one with love and care. And now, tell me, have you ever been stabbed by someone who swore they'd protect you? Then stay with me. Because what you're about to hear might sound painfully familiar. It was the fall of 1981, and Kentucky was painted in burnt orange and fading gold. The air was crisp, the skies stubbornly blue, and every porch in Waverly had a pumpkin or two. I remember waking up to the sound of leaves rustling down the sidewalk and the faint hum of Mr. Ellison's radio. Across the street playing Johnny Cash, that was the kind of town. Waverly was the kind where you recognized people by the way their screen door creaked, or the smell of their Sunday roast. Our house sat at the end of Maple Street, 2 stories, green shutters, wraparound porch, and a swing where I spent most of my afternoons rubbing my belly, pregnant with our second child. Mark had built that swing himself, the summer after our wedding. Said he wanted a place for me to watch the world grow old. Funny, isn't it? He never mentioned who he'd be growing old with. I was 18 when we got married. Just a baby, really. Fresh out of high school, still folding laundry with my mother's voice in my head. Mark was 21. A farm boy with dirt under his nails and eyes that looked like morning dew. He worked hard, kissed my forehead before sunrise, and told me I was his entire world. I believed him. I'd stake my soul on it. And I did. We were close with his brother's family, too close. In hindsight, Nathan and Helen lived just 2 lots down. Barbecues, family board game nights, even double dates. Helen was beautiful. Blonde, perfect posture, always in control. I used to envy her. The way she laughed without caring, how her lipstick never smeared after dinner. But I never imagined, never even dreamed, that behind that dazzling smile, she was holding a knife with my name on it. The first time I noticed something was off, it was just a whisper. Mark came home late from helping Nathan fix the tractor. But Nathan, bless his heart, had told me at church earlier that morning he'd already fixed it. My stomach twisted, but I said nothing. I was 8 months pregnant, swollen, tired, and desperate to believe I wasn't imagining things. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept turning over in bed, watching the shadows on the ceiling dance with the streetlights. Mark snored beside me, breathing slow, as if nothing in the world was broken. Meanwhile, something inside me was cracking open, slow, soft, but undeniable. And then came the dreams, the kind that feel like warnings. In one, I was walking barefoot in the woods, and Helen stood ahead, holding my baby. She smiled, that same perfect, icy smile, and vanished into the trees. I woke up crying, clutching my belly, whispering prayers I hadn't said in years. I tried to shake it off. You're just hormonal, I told myself. Pregnancy messes with your head. But deep down, I knew. My bones knew. The way a dog knows a storm's coming long before the clouds roll in. One afternoon, I stopped by Helen's unannounced. Mark's truck was in the driveway. Nathan's wasn't. My heart skipped a beat. I knocked. No answer. I waited. No footsteps, no voices, just silence, heavy and suspicious. I turned back and walked home, pretending I hadn't seen what I'd seen. I told myself 100 stories to make sense of it. Maybe he's helping her with something heavy. Maybe they're planning a surprise baby shower. But the truth? The truth was already bleeding through the cracks. whispering that my life, my perfect, quiet, small-town life, was being stolen from under my nose. That evening, Mark brought home flowers, daisies, my favorite. He smiled, kissed my cheek, and said, "You looked tired this morning, thought this might cheer you up." And it did. For a moment, until I saw the lipstick on his collar, just a faint smudge. Not mine. That's when the world started spinning slower. I didn't cry. Not yet. I just folded the flowers into an old vase, placed it by the window, and told myself, whatever this is, I'll figure it out. I'm a wife, a mother. I'll fix it. But some things, sweetheart, some things ain't meant to be fixed. The next morning, the house felt colder. Not just the autumn breeze slipping through the windows, but something heavier. Something inside me had shifted. I watched Mark from across the kitchen table, the way he stirred his coffee, the rhythm of his fingers tapping the mug, how he avoided my eyes. It was all so careful. Too careful. "You okay, Al?" he asked, pouring syrup over his pancakes, acting like the man who once kissed my toes under a thunderstorm. "Just tired," I said, forcing a smile. My voice felt foreign. I'd gotten good at pretending, at making nice, at pretending my heart wasn't screaming every time he said Helen's name. But deep down, my instincts were screaming louder than ever. And the thing about instincts, darling, is that they don't lie. We just choose to ignore them. I started watching everything, taking mental notes. Little things, like how his face lit up when he got a phone call and stepped outside to take it, or how he'd showered the second he got home, even when he didn't look dirty. I began to notice how Helen stopped looking me in the eye, how she suddenly had excuses to leave early from family dinners, how she flinched when our kids played too close together. And still, I said nothing. Because when you're a young wife in a small town, raised to be polite and God-fearing, you don't accuse your husband. You pray. You bake pies. You put on lipstick and try harder. That's what my mama always said. A good woman keeps her family together. But what happens when it's the family that's tearing you apart? I remember the day I cracked. It was early November. The cold was biting. I'd just come back from the grocery store with a bag full of canned cranberries for Thanksgiving. I passed Helen's house and saw Mark's truck again. My throat tightened. Something inside me snapped. I drove home, put the groceries away, and instead of crying like I wanted to, I grabbed a pen and wrote her a note. Not Mark, her. Meet me at the diner. 5 o'clock. No excuses. Eleanor. I folded it neatly, walked back down Maple Street, and slipped it under her door. My hands were shaking, but my heart felt steadier than it had in weeks. At 5 sharp, I sat in a booth at Murphy's Diner, facing the window. I ordered a black coffee, no sugar. My eyes never left the door. She walked in 5 minutes late, wearing red lipstick and a green coat I'd never seen before. She looked nervous. Good. She should have been. She sat across from me, avoided my gaze. I said nothing, just watched her squirm. Finally, she whispered, "What is this about?" I leaned in, looked her straight in the eyes, and asked the question I'd rehearsed 100 times. "Is it true?" She blinked. "What? You and Mark?" She froze. That second, that very second, told me everything I needed to know. She didn't deny it. She didn't fight it. She just froze. And in her silence, I heard the truth screaming. She looked down, fiddled with the napkin, and said, "It wasn't supposed to happen." I swallowed back tears. My hands gripped the edge of the table so tightly I thought I'd leave fingerprints in the wood. "How long?" I asked. "A few months?" She still wouldn't look at me. "And Nathan," I whispered, "your husband, my brother-in-law, does he know?" She shook her head. "Please, Eleanor, please don't ruin everything." That was when I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because the absurdity of it burned through my pain. She was asking me not to ruin everything. I stood up slowly, dropped $1 on the table, and said, "You already did." Then I walked out. The cold hit me like a slap. The air smelled of smoke and winter, and somewhere deep inside me, a dam broke. I didn't go home right away. I drove 4 hours, through country roads and past frozen fields. I stopped at the edge of Old Mill Creek, where Mark once asked me to marry him, and screamed until my voice cracked. Because there's no pain like betrayal. But even worse is the shame that comes with staying quiet. After that night at the diner, I didn't tell a soul. Not my sister Clara, not my pastor, not even Nathan, and Lord knows he had every right to know. I went home and tucked my son into bed, kissed Mark on the cheek like I hadn't just watched my life rot from the inside out, and laid beside him in a bed that suddenly felt like a coffin. I stared at the ceiling until the sun came up, my body beside his, but my soul miles away. In small-town America, people don't ask questions unless they already know the answers. And even then, they rarely speak them out loud. It's the unspoken code. Mind your business. Smile for the church crowd. So, I did. I wore my Sunday dress. I brought my green bean casserole to the Thanksgiving potluck. I stood next to Mark for the family photo. Even smiled. But inside, I was unraveling. Thanksgiving that year was hosted at Nathan and Helen's house. I know. You're probably thinking, why would you go? But, honey, you've got to understand. When you grow up in a world where women are taught to hold the family together at all costs, walking away feels like setting fire to everything your mother taught you to protect. So, I went. I brought my famous pecan pie, even curled my hair. I looked good. And Helen, she looked nervous. Couldn't keep her hand steady. Couldn't look me in the eye. That was the only power I had left, knowing she knew that I knew. Mark avoided me that day like I was made of glass. Nathan? He was glowing, joking, making his famous sweet tea like nothing in his world was crumbling. Because he didn't know. Yet, I watched them from across the room, my husband and his brother's wife, laughing at something by the fireplace. So familiar, so natural, like it was their house, their family, their world. And I was just a ghost inside it. I excused myself and went to the bathroom, closed the door, locked it. That's where I cried, silently, leaning against the sink, mascara running, hands trembling. I looked in the mirror and didn't recognize myself. I was 25, married with 2 kids, and dying inside a life I no longer recognized. When I came back out, Nathan was setting the table. He handed me a plate with a smile. "You okay, sis?" I nodded, lied, just tired. Because the truth would have shattered him, and I wasn't ready to be the one holding the wreckage. Dinner was loud. Turkey carved, prayers said, children giggling. I sat next to Mark and watched him pass Helen the gravy with a smirk. She giggled. My stomach turned. No one noticed. No one ever does when the wife smiles. Later that night, when we got home, I told Mark I had a headache and went to bed early. I lay there in the dark, my back to him, and listened to him undress, brush his teeth, climb into bed like everything was normal. But everything had changed. I couldn't unsee it. Couldn't unhear Helen's whisper at that diner table. Couldn't undo the betrayal that now shared my roof, my meals, my marriage. I clutched my pillow and bit down on it to keep from screaming. Because what would happen if I did scream? Would he comfort me? Or run to her? The silence between us grew louder each day. And soon, the house became a museum of fake smiles, polite nods, and invisible grief. Mark started coming home later, said he had more shifts at the mill. But I knew better. And what's worse than knowing someone's cheating on you is them thinking you're too dumb to see it. Winter rolled in fast that year. The streets of Waverly were soon blanketed in soft snow, covering everything like a secret. I used to love the first snow. It meant hot cocoa, wool socks, and sitting by the fireplace with the kids while Mark read Bible stories aloud. But that year, the snow only reminded me of how cold I felt inside. The days passed in a fog. I'd wake up, dress the children, pack their lunches, kiss them goodbye, and stand by the window long after the school bus pulled away, just staring, hoping the stillness outside would quiet the storm inside me. It never did. I stopped talking to friends, avoided Clara's phone calls, ignored the ladies from church who invited me to quilting circles or prayer meetings. I couldn't fake small talk anymore. I couldn't sit in a circle and pretend to be blessed and thankful when everything in me was broken and raw. Mark noticed, of course, but he never asked. Not once. He'd say things like, "You look tired," or "You should get some rest," as if my silence was just fatigued, not the desperate scream of a woman being eaten alive by betrayal. Sometimes I'd catch him looking at me differently, like he was testing the waters, wondering if I knew. And other times, he'd act like everything was normal, laughing with the kids, bringing home flowers again, like those daisies could cover the rot underneath. And Helen, she stayed away. For weeks. No surprise visits, no casseroles, no family dinners. She knew I was a ticking time bomb. One Sunday afternoon, Nathan stopped by. Just him. He brought over a bag of pecans from his orchard. Said he missed the kids' laughter at his place. I invited him in. We sat at the kitchen table sipping sweet tea while the kids played in the living room. He looked around and said, "Feels quiet around here lately." I nodded. "It's been a hard season," I said. He looked at me carefully. "You and Mark, okay." I froze. Just for a second. Then I smiled, a tight, practiced smile. "We're fine." Nathan meant well. He was the kind of man who thought a bad mood could be fixed with pie and prayer. But some things run deeper than that. After he left, I sat at that table for a long time, staring at the condensation on my glass, wondering how many more lies I'd have to tell to keep this family from crumbling. Because, the truth, I wasn't just angry at Mark. I was angry at myself for staying, for being too scared to blow it all up, for being so conditioned to protect my marriage that I forgot to protect myself. Late at night, after the kids were asleep and Mark was snoring beside me, I'd sneak into the laundry room and cry. It was the only place I could be alone. Among the scent of detergent and fabric softener, I'd bury my face in the clean towels and let the grief come out in broken sobs. I started writing in a notebook, just a few lines each night. He smiled at her in front of me today. She looked guilty, but not sorry. I'm starting to hate the sound of his voice. Those pages became my only confession, my only witness, my proof that I wasn't going crazy, that the pain was real. And still, I stayed. Because leaving would mean explaining. And I didn't know how to say it out loud without shattering into 1,000 pieces. One morning, I was folding laundry in the living room when my son, Tommy, barely 6 years old at the time, came running in with one of Mark's flannel shirts in his hand. "Mama," he said, "why does Daddy smell like Aunt Helen's perfume?" I froze. I didn't breathe, didn't blink, just stared at him, standing there in his little overalls and Velcro sneakers, innocence pouring out of him like sunshine through a window. I took the shirt from his hand and smiled. "I don't know, honey. Maybe she hugged him at church." He nodded, satisfied, ran off, and I crumpled to the floor. It wasn't just me who noticed anymore. The lies were leaking into the corners of our home, reaching even the smallest hearts. And still, Mark said nothing, did nothing, just kept pretending we were okay. I started to hate the quiet between us. It was suffocating. Every dinner was a play. Every kiss on the cheek felt like a slap, wearing a smile. The man I married, the one who read Psalms before bed and cried when our daughter was born, was slowly fading into a stranger I didn't recognize. And maybe the scariest part, I was fading too. One night, I stood at the kitchen sink, washing dishes after dinner. Mark came up behind me and wrapped his arms around my waist. I flinched. He pulled back. "What's wrong?" I dried my hands, turned to face him, and said, "When was the last time you held me without guilt in your chest?" He looked at me like I'd slapped him. "What are you talking about?" he asked, too quickly. "You know exactly what I'm talking about," I whispered. He didn't answer, just walked out of the room. That was it. No apology, no denial, no fight, just silence. And that silence said everything. I called Clara the next morning, my sister, my safe place. I hadn't talked to her in weeks, but the words came tumbling out of me like a dam finally bursting. She listened, quiet, heavy breathing on the other end. When I finished, she said, "Come stay with me for a while. Bring the kids. Just come." But I didn't go, because walking out wasn't just leaving a house. It was leaving behind the version of myself I had clung to for so long. The good wife, the loyal mother, the protector of peace. And I didn't know who I was without those titles. That week, Helen showed up. At my door, I opened it, and there she stood, perfectly polished, red nails, tight smile. "Can we talk?" she asked. I almost slammed the door in her face. But I didn't. I stepped aside, let her in. She sat on the edge of the couch, hands clasped in her lap like a schoolgirl waiting to be scolded. "I think it's over," she said. "With Mark. I told him I can't keep doing this." I laughed, bitter and dry. "How noble of you." She flinched. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen," she whispered. "That line's getting old," I said, crossing my arms. "You didn't mean to fall into my husband's bed. You didn't mean to carry his child while raising your husband's son under the same roof." She started to cry. But I didn't, because by that point, my tears had dried up and turned to dust. She left not long after. Didn't ask for forgiveness. Just walked out like she always had the option to leave. And me, I stayed. Because I still didn't know how to walk away from something I had poured my whole soul into. But that night, I opened the windows. All of them. Let the cold air sweep through the house like a cleansing wind. I stood there, arms crossed, nightgown blowing in the breeze, and whispered to the empty rooms. "I don't forgive you yet, but I'm learning how to let go." The house felt different after that night. Not better, just honest. The air was colder, yes, but it carried something else too. Space. Silence that didn't lie. I still made breakfast, still folded clothes, still smiled at the kids, but it wasn't the same mask. It was thinner now, like I'd started peeling off the layers of a woman I no longer wanted to be. Mark noticed. Oh, he noticed. He came home one evening holding a bouquet of yellow roses. My favorite. I didn't even look at them. I just said, "You don't get to buy silence anymore." He didn't respond. He just placed the flowers in the middle of the kitchen table, where they sat like a guilty confession for a week, wilting, unattended, just like us. He tried, in his way, stayed home more, took the kids out for ice cream, repaired the squeaky porch swing without me asking, but none of it touched the place inside me that had been scorched. That part? It was his to tend to, and he hadn't even asked where the fire started. One night, I found the notebook again, the one I'd been writing in. I flipped through pages full of heartbreak, suspicion, shame. And then I turned to a blank one, and for the first time in weeks, I didn't write about them. I wrote about me. I used to love painting. I wrote, why did I stop? I don't even know what brought it up. Maybe it was the memory of the little studio I once kept in the attic. Maybe it was the smell of turpentine in the back of the closet. Maybe it was just that my soul was begging for color again. The next morning, while the kids were at school and Mark was out, I climbed up to that attic. It was dusty, the windows fogged, the easel leaning in a corner like an old friend left behind. I pulled it out, wiped it down, opened a paint box that hadn't seen sunlight in years. And I painted. Nothing big, nothing grand, just colors. Blue like grief, red like anger, yellow like the roses I refused, and a soft, stubborn green, the color of healing I didn't yet believe in. I painted in silence. And for the first time in months, I felt something other than pain. That night, I didn't cry in the laundry room. I didn't write in the notebook. I just sat on the porch swing Mark had repaired and let the night wrap around me like a blanket I'd almost forgotten how to enjoy. And you know what I realized? That healing doesn't come in grand gestures. It comes in quiet choices. In climbing back into the attic, in opening a window, in saying no to flowers that smell like guilt. Mark still hadn't asked for forgiveness. Helen still hadn't faced the family. The kids still didn't know a thing. But, for once, I wasn't living for them. I was living for that little whisper inside me that said, you deserve more than survival. And maybe that whisper, barely audible, barely there, was the first real breath I'd taken in years. A few days later, I found myself at the town library. I hadn't been there in years, not since before the kids were born. But something pulled me in that day. Maybe it was the need to be anywhere but home. Maybe it was the scent of old books that reminded me of a time before Betrayal had fingerprints on everything. I wandered the aisles like a ghost until I found myself in the self-help section. I wasn't even sure what I was looking for. A miracle? A manual on how to stop hurting? A step-by-step guide to forgiving the unforgivable. But what I found was a journal. It wasn't for sale, just tucked between two books, like someone had forgotten it there. I picked it up, flipped through its pages, and froze. It was full of handwritten notes from women. Notes to themselves? Letters they'd never sent? Confessions they were too scared to say out loud? One page said, he never said sorry. I stopped waiting. I closed the journal and held it to my chest like it could stop my heart from breaking all over again. And in that moment, I realized something so simple, so painfully obvious. I had spent months waiting for an apology from people who felt no guilt. Mark had never said he was sorry. Helen had never asked what this did to me. And I had been giving them power by holding my breath for a moment that might never come. I checked out 3 books that day. One on healing after betrayal, one on journaling through grief, and one novel, just because the cover made me smile. That night, when Mark walked in from work and kissed me on the cheek, I didn't kiss him back. I didn't smile. I didn't ask how his day went. I just said, we need to talk. He froze. Now? Yes, now. We sat at the kitchen table. The kids were in the next room watching cartoons, their laughter echoing down the hallway like a cruel contrast to the heaviness in the air. I know about you and Helen, I said, calm, steady, like I had rehearsed it in every dream and nightmare for the past year. He blinked, stiffened, swallowed hard. I'm not asking for details, I interrupted. I'm not asking for excuses. I just needed to say it, out loud, because I can't keep pretending I don't know. He said nothing. I'm not leaving. Not yet. But I'm also not the same woman who stood at that altar. And you're not the same man who kissed me on our porch swing in the rain. He lowered his head. I messed up. You destroyed me, I corrected. There's a difference. He looked up, eyes glistening. I never stopped loving you. And that made me angrier than anything else. Because love shouldn't taste like lies. It shouldn't come wrapped in the scent of another woman's perfume. It shouldn't feel like rot under roses. I'm not asking you to leave, I said finally. But from now on, I'm not shrinking myself to make you comfortable. And with that, I stood up, walked into the attic, lit a candle, and painted until my fingers were numb and my soul felt just a little less bruised. Because that was the night I stopped waiting for him to make it right, and started figuring out how to make myself whole again. There was a spare room in our house that had always been for guests, though we rarely had any. It had a daybed, an old rocking chair, and a desk that mostly collected dust and forgotten birthday cards. It used to be Mark's home office before smartphones made him feel too important to sit at a desk. And for years, I walked past it without a second thought. But one quiet Tuesday morning, I opened the door and just stood there. The light hit differently that day. The window was cracked, and the breeze made the curtains flutter like a whisper. You can start over in here. I cleaned the whole room in one afternoon, stripped the bed, dusted every corner, opened the closet and threw out old boxes of bills and broken promises. Then I stood in the doorway again, sweaty, tired, and free. That night, I didn't sleep beside Mark. I carried my pillow down the hall, slipped into that clean room, and shut the door behind me like it was a statement. Because it was. He didn't follow, he didn't knock, he didn't ask why. Maybe he already knew. Maybe he was relieved. Or maybe he just didn't care enough to fight for me anymore. And for the first time, I was okay with that. The room became mine. Not just physically, but emotionally. I put my easel in the corner, laid out my journals on the desk, even brought in a radio that played nothing but Motown and soft jazz. It smelled like lavender and wood polish, and something new I hadn't felt in years. Peace. The kids asked questions. Of course. Why is Mommy sleeping in the guest room? I smiled and said, because Mommy needs a little more space to think right now. And they accepted it, as kids do, trusting that grown-ups always know what they're doing. But I didn't. I was winging it. Every second. Yet, even in the uncertainty, I felt stronger. Like I was reclaiming pieces of myself. Not all at once, but slowly. With each sunrise spent alone, with each painting half finished, with each night I chose to keep my distance, instead of begging for comfort from a man who had betrayed me. One morning, I brewed coffee just for myself. Real coffee, not decaf. Not the kind Mark liked. My kind. Dark roast, splash of cream, no sugar. I sipped it on the porch in my robe and thought, this is mine again. And that became my new ritual. Coffee, porch, stillness, myself, no fake smiles, no apology, just breath and birdsong and peace. Mark noticed the change. He started asking if I wanted to go out to dinner, if I wanted to watch a movie together. He brought me little gifts, a scarf, a candle, a book I already owned. But I didn't bite. Because you can't buy your way back into a heart you've broken. You have to earn it, slowly, painfully, honestly. And he hadn't even asked how I'd been sleeping. That was the thing that stuck with me most. He didn't ask, so I stopped offering answers. And instead, I started building a version of myself that no longer needed his questions. That spare room, it became my refuge. And in that room, I wrote something on the wall, just with a pencil, right above the desk. I am not what he did to me. I am what I choose to become after. And every day after that, I read it, until I believed it. It was a Saturday morning in early spring when the phone rang. I was in my room, the real one now, the one with the easel and the radio, brushing my hair in the mirror. Still in my robe, when I heard Mark answer in the hallway. His voice dropped, like it always did when he didn't want me to hear. Yeah, he said, I've got time. I'll be there in 10. Then, silence. I waited. Waited to see if he'd knock, if he'd poke his head in, say something, anything. But nothing came. Just the sound of keys jingling, the front door closing, and his truck rumbling down Maple Street like always. I didn't follow him, not that day. Instead, I walked out to the porch, coffee in hand, and sat with the ache like I'd learned to do. And while the wind danced through the dogwood trees and the birds chirped above my head, something inside me settled into a strange new truth. He was still seeing her. He may not have said it out loud. He may not have come home smelling of her skin or with lipstick on his collar anymore. But I could feel it. That kind of betrayal doesn't just vanish overnight. And that kind of desire doesn't die in silence. Later that day, Nathan showed up. He'd brought the boys over to play in the backyard, and as we sat on lawn chairs sipping lemonade, I studied him carefully, wondering how much he really knew. Mark's been different lately, he said, out of nowhere. Distant, I nodded. Yeah, a lot has changed, Nathan sighed. I've had my suspicions. I guess I didn't want to believe it. And there it was. The crack in the wall. The confession neither of us was brave enough to say out loud, but both of us knew exactly what it meant. I placed my glass down gently and said, some truths reveal themselves whether we're ready or not. He looked at me with something like pity. Or maybe it was solidarity. And for a moment, I felt a strange connection to him. Not romantic, not dramatic, just human. Two people blindsided by the ones they trusted most. That night, I wrote in my journal again. I see it all now. The way he touches his phone when he thinks I'm not looking. The half-truths he stacks like bricks. The way his eyes look past me even when I'm speaking. I'm not crazy. I'm not paranoid. I'm a woman who knows exactly what betrayal feels like. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I took off my wedding ring. I placed it in the top drawer of my desk, next to dried paintbrushes and loose change. And when I looked at my hand, I didn't feel empty. I felt honest. Because the truth was, I had been alone in that marriage long before Helen ever slipped into our lives like a shadow. The affair didn't start the distance. It only named it. And now, with each day that passed, I was starting to realize something painful and powerful. Loving someone isn't always enough to make them stay. But loving yourself? That's the only thing that can save you. It was early April when the letter came. Not an email, not a phone call. A handwritten letter, sealed with the kind of care that suggested guilt rather than grace. It was from Helen. I stood at the mailbox, holding it for a long time, just staring at the envelope with my name written in her loopy cursive. The same handwriting she used to label lasagna pans at potluck. Part of me wanted to throw it in the trash. Another part wanted to burn it. But instead, I opened it. The letter was long, messy, tear-stained, maybe. Or maybe that was just my own hand trembling. She said she was sorry, that she was ashamed, that she hadn't spoken to Mark in weeks, not since everything came out. She said she was moving, out of Waverly, said the town felt too small now, said she couldn't look at Nathan without breaking. And she ended it with, "You didn't deserve this. I hope you find peace." I folded it up, placed it in my coat pocket, and didn't tell a soul. Because it didn't matter anymore. Her words couldn't fix what she broke. And, truthfully, I didn't need her to. Later that night, I made dinner. Just me and the kids. Mark said he'd be home late again. The kids laughed around the table, telling stories about school, giggling over spilled juice, and I watched them, really watched them, and realized something I hadn't admitted to myself yet. They were okay. They were still okay. I was the one drowning in guilt and silence and sacrifice, but they were laughing, smiling, living. And I thought, what if I did the same? After putting them to bed, I sat down at my desk and began writing a letter of my own. Not to Helen, not to Mark, not even to Nathan, to myself. It started like this. Dear Eleanor, you are not weak for loving deeply. You are not foolish for hoping. You are not broken beyond repair. I wrote for an hour, pouring out every wound, every fear, every piece of myself that had gone unheard for far too long. When I was done, I folded the letter and placed it in the drawer beside my ring. Then I packed a small bag. Just the essentials. Pajamas, toothbrush, a change of clothes. I tucked the kids in, kissed their foreheads, and whispered, "Mommy loves you very much. I'll be back before the weekend ends." Then I left, just for a few nights, to a bed and breakfast outside town. No one knew where I was. Not even Mark. I turned off my phone, lit a candle, took a hot bath. And for the first time in years, I slept, really slept, without the weight of betrayal lying next to me. I woke up to birds, sunlight pouring through lace curtains, and something I hadn't felt in months. Calm. Not happiness. Not yet, but calm. And that was a start. I took myself to breakfast, read a novel by the lake, wrote in my journal, watched the sun set in silence. I didn't cry once. Because in that quiet little room, tucked away from everything, I remembered what peace sounded like. And I promised myself, I'll never forget it again. When I returned home Sunday evening, everything looked exactly the same. The porch light still flickered. The azaleas were in bloom, and Mark's truck sat in the driveway like it had every day for the past decade. But something inside me had shifted. The woman who unlocked that front door wasn't the same one who'd left. The kids ran to me, arms wide, voices full of stories and laughter. I knelt to kiss their cheeks, inhale their scent, soak in the love that never betrayed me. And Mark, he stood in the hallway, unsure, quiet, watching like a man trying to read a language he never bothered to learn. "You okay?" he asked. "I am," I replied. Not, "I guess," or "I think so." Just, "I am." He followed me into the kitchen, tried to make small talk, told me about a movie he saw, something funny the kids did, how the dog had torn up the garden again. I listened politely, nodding, but didn't offer much back. He felt the distance. And for once, he didn't try to close it with flowers or forced affection. After the kids were asleep, he found me in the guest room, my room. He stood in the doorway, hands in his pockets, voice low. "I missed you." I looked up from my journal and said, "Did you?" He hesitated. "Yeah, I did." There was a time when those 3 words would have broken me, unraveled me, made me believe again. But now, they sounded like an echo from a life I had already started to outgrow. I stood, walked over, and looked him straight in the eyes. "I'm not asking for anything," I said. "Not an explanation, not forgiveness, not even the truth anymore. I've stopped waiting for that. What I do need is space and honesty. From now on." He nodded, eyes darting away. "Okay," I waited. "Just a beat." "There's more." He looked up. "I'm not going to fight you. If you're still in love with her, if your heart belongs somewhere else, go. No yelling, no drama. Just go." Silence. "I'm not seeing her anymore," he said finally. "Good," I replied. "But that's not why I'm saying this. I'm saying it because I deserve a life that doesn't depend on someone else's promises." He didn't respond, just stood there, quiet, still. Like a man slowly realizing the woman he thought would never leave had already emotionally packed her bags months ago. That night, I slept better than I had in years. Not because he said what I wanted to hear, but because I had finally said what I needed to say. And the power in that, it's unmatched. In the days that followed, I focused on rebuilding what mattered. Myself, my joy, my voice. I took walks. I painted. I called Clara. I laughed without guilt. I cooked for pleasure, not obligation. I bought a new dress. Just one. Deep plum, soft cotton. I wore it to the store, to church, to sit on the porch with a glass of wine. It wasn't about being seen. It was about seeing myself again. Mark tried, in his own, slow, clumsy way. He took on more of the parenting load, showed up earlier, asked more questions. But he never crossed the threshold of my new room again, because I hadn't decided if he belonged in my peace. And I wasn't in a rush to answer. It was a Thursday morning, the kind that smelled like warm bread and felt like nothing bad could ever happen. I had just finished watering the garden when I heard it. A knock at the front door. Slow, measured, too polite to be urgent, too deliberate to be casual. When I opened it, my breath caught in my throat. Helen. She stood there with her arms crossed, a worn cardigan wrapped around her, hair tied back. No makeup, nothing like the polished version I remembered. She looked smaller, older. Like guilt had settled in her bones and made a home there. "Can we talk?" she asked. Everything inside me screamed no. But my lips parted and said, "Out here." We sat on the porch swing, the one Mark had once built for us, the one I had claimed back as mine. The air was thick with spring pollen and tension. She started slowly. "I wanted you to hear it from me before the rest of the town does." My stomach dropped. "I'm pregnant," she said. Quiet, measured. And just like that, the blood left my face. I stared straight ahead, hands clenched in my lap, every nerve in my body on fire. "Is it his?" She nodded. "Are you sure?" "I wouldn't be here if I wasn't." I closed my eyes, swallowed hard, and felt something inside me fracture again. Not like the first time, when I found out about the affair. This was different. This was the kind of break that doesn't scream. It sinks. "I thought it was over," I whispered. "So did I," she said, but it wasn't. Or maybe it never really was. And then, as if she hadn't just detonated a bomb in my chest, she added, "I'm not asking for anything from him, or you. I didn't want you to find out from someone else." "How noble," I nodded. Not because I forgave her, not because I understood, but because I needed her to leave. She stood, wiped her hands on her jeans, and walked back down the steps, disappearing the same way she'd arrived, softly, like a shadow retreating from the morning sun. I sat there, still, not crying, not speaking, just being. And then the thoughts came, fast, sharp, cruel. Will he go back to her now? Was all of it a lie? The change, the distance, the silence? Will this child grow up with a father who once belonged to me? When Mark came home that night, I was already in the kitchen. I didn't say anything at first. Just placed a plate of food in front of him. Watched him sit. Then I asked, "Is there anything you want to tell me?" He froze. Fork halfway to his mouth. Swallowed, dry. "No," he said. That was all I needed. I stood, took off my apron, and said, quietly, "You've lied before. You're lying now. But I won't let your choices define me anymore." He stood too, startled. "Eleanor." I held up a hand. Calm, firm. "You don't need to say anything. Because this time, I'm not asking." That night, I didn't sleep in the guest room. I packed 2 bags, one for me, one for the kids. I wrote a note. Simple, sharp. I deserve peace. And so do they. Then I left. No warning, no goodbye. Just a woman reclaiming her future, one quiet decision at a time. I didn't go far. Just 2 towns over, to a small rental cottage owned by a woman from church named Luann. She'd offered it once, long ago, when her husband passed, in case you ever need to breathe. She said, "I never thought I'd take her up on it. Until now." The place was modest. A whitewashed porch, 2 bedrooms, a clawfoot tub that creaked when the water ran too hot. But it was mine. All mine. For the first time in years, I walked into a space where no one had ever lied to me. No one had ever betrayed me. No one had ever kissed someone else and come home like it never happened. I set the kids up in their room, tucked them in gently, kissed their foreheads. They didn't cry. They didn't ask questions. Children? No. Even when we don't speak the truth. And when the house went quiet, I poured myself a glass of wine and stepped out onto the porch. I sat barefoot on the steps, the air smelling of honeysuckle and wood smoke. The stars were so bright that night, like they'd been waiting for me to look up again. I wrapped my arms around my knees, took a deep breath, And for the first time in a long, long while, I smiled. Not because everything was fine, not because I had answers, but because I was no longer living in a home built on secrets. The next morning, I made pancakes. Not for Mark, not for show, just for my kids and me. We ate on the porch, syrup dripping, birds chirping, sun warming our shoulders. The kind of peace you don't realize you've missed until it returns. Later that week, I went into town, opened a bank account in my name, bought a secondhand bookshelf and filled it with paperbacks I hadn't read in years, found a job at the florist shop part-time, just enough to get by. The smell of soil and petals felt healing, like I was digging through the earth to plant new roots. Mark called dozens of times. I didn't answer. He texted, "Come home." He didn't ask how we were. He didn't ask what we needed. He just asked for his comfort back. I deleted every message, and then I blocked the number, because what he was calling home had stopped being mine the moment he handed it to someone else. Nathan stopped by the shop once, quiet, hesitant. He didn't say much, just looked at me with those tired eyes and whispered, "You didn't deserve any of this." "I know," I said, and that was all. That night, after the kids fell asleep, I sat by the window and wrote a new letter in my journal. I am no longer holding the door open for someone who refuses to walk through it. I am no longer setting myself on fire to keep someone else warm. I am no longer apologizing for expecting loyalty. And then, I lit a candle, placed that journal on the windowsill, and watched the flame flicker like a heartbeat. Steady, strong, mine. I wasn't healed, but I was healing. And that, my darling, is enough. It was a gray afternoon when I saw him again. The clouds hung low like they were listening. I had just finished arranging a bouquet of white peonies and eucalyptus at the shop when I heard the bell over the door. And there he was, Mark. His hair looked more silver than I remembered. His shirt wrinkled, eyes sunken like a man who hadn't been sleeping. And I wondered, briefly, if guilt does that, or just the absence of convenience. He didn't speak at first, just stood there, hands in his pockets, watching me like someone visiting a grave. I didn't offer a smile. I didn't ask how he was. I simply said, "I have 10 minutes. What do you want?" He cleared his throat. "I needed to see you. You're seeing me. I miss you." I nodded. "I imagine you do." He blinked, surprised by how steady I was. He looked around the shop, like the flowers might soften me. "I've been thinking about everything. About us. About the kids. About how I ruined—" "You didn't ruin me, Mark," I interrupted. "You ruined us. There's a difference." He stepped closer. "I know I hurt you, and I'll regret it for the rest of my life." "I hope you do," I said, voice even, because I carry it every day. Not just what you did, but what you allowed. The silence, the lies. The way you made me feel like I was crazy when I already knew the truth. His eyes welled up. "I didn't know how to fix it." "You didn't want to fix it," I said. "You wanted to avoid it. There's a difference." We stood there in silence. Just the hum of the cooler behind me and the scent of fresh-cut lilacs between us. Then I said the one thing I had been waiting to say for years. "You made me disappear inside a life I built for us. And now, I'm choosing to exist again without your permission." He nodded slowly, the weight of it all finally sinking in. "I'm not here to ask for forgiveness," he said. "Good," I replied, "because I'm not offering it. Not now, maybe not ever." He swallowed hard. "Do the kids hate me?" "They're too young to hate," I said, "but they're old enough to feel what I've been feeling. And that's not on me to fix anymore." He stepped back, looked at me like I was a stranger. And maybe I was. Because the woman he left behind, she begged, she waited, she bent until she broke. But the woman standing before him now, she had boundaries. She had breath. She had herself. "I should go," he said. "You should," I agreed. And with that, he turned, opened the door, and walked out. No goodbye, no begging, no promise to do better, just silence. And for the first time in years, it didn't hurt. I stood there behind the counter, surrounded by beauty, breathing in air that was mine again. I picked up my scissors, snipped the stem of a fresh tulip, and whispered under my breath, "I'm proud of you, Eleanor."